Hi, this is John Sarver, and welcome to our federal legislation session. And we've just been learning some things about screen sharing. And let me turn it over to John, who's going to talk about the what I refer to as Bub, the big ugly bill.
Yeah, that's an appropriate comment, John. I refuse to call it by what Trump calls it. But I also want to thank our sponsors, the Environmental Great Lakes and Energy, Harvest Solar, Serenergy, Sumter Solar Energy. So we really appreciate their support for our work. Um, so yeah, we wanted to have this special, I wouldn't call it a special session, but this certainly is a unique situation with the passage of this very, very large federal bill, which is frankly going to impact on renewable energy around the country. But this bill does more than that. And we're not going to even talk about the fact that it's wiping out a lot of Medicaid funding, which most most estimates indicate that 11 million Americans are going to lose health insurance as a result, which I think is very, very bad in terms of this bill. And this bill was enacted with simply by the Republicans in the House and the Senate. So it's a completely partisan bill. GLREA is a nonprofit bipartisan organization, but we can't help but acknowledge how a bill was enacted, whether it's at the federal level or at the state level. And just like in November of 2023, where a bunch of wonderful laws were enacted to support the expansion of renewable energy, and that was all enacted by Democrats. This bill, as I said a second ago, was only supported by Republicans. And, so it was a very partisan bill. And I can't help but think this is a driven mostly as an ideological attack on renewable energy and what President Biden did under the investment, tax credit series of bills. But um, but I want to focus less on the ideology, though we can talk about that if we want. And I think we should frankly have an open discussion. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. I just want to lay out the highlights of what this bill does. And then I'm interested in your reaction to it, and particularly about what you think will happen if people can no longer reduce the cost of purchasing a solar energy system for your home by 30%. Do you think people will still want to buy solar, even if it's going to cost more, probably have a longer payoff time? Um, and, and so that's essentially it. One of the arguments that I've heard recently that suggests that people will still want to get solar is frankly because DTE and consumers, and probably most of the utilities in Michigan, keep raising the rates significantly. Right now, there's a proposal by Consumers Energy, and if it went through in its entirety, it would raise residential rates by 13.3%. And then DTE has a similar proposal in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission. And if that was granted entirely as they proposed, it would raise residential rates by 11.1%, which is way above inflation. So the argument I heard, frankly, was that, yeah, it's going to cost you more to install solar after 2025 when you lose the investment tax credit. But because utilities rates keep going up every year, you know, you're going to continue to save money every year as the rates go up as compared to your neighbor who continues to pay a lot more. So that's kind of a setting the stage for our discussion. But let's first go over some of the basics of the bill. And John Sarver is going to put up on the screen. I emailed out two documents this afternoon. The first one is this thing that you see on your screen right now. This I found to be a handy chart that basically shows everything you need to know about the specific tax credit, and the far left number is the specific number associated with that tax credit. So for the very first one, used electric vehicles, you'll see a 25E. That is the actual number of the tax credit in the federal tax code. And then the center column, of course, shows what the law was under President Biden. And then the far right is the new timeline. So let's go through a few of these. And again, if anybody has any questions, don't wait to raise your hand at the end of my presentation. Just ask immediately, because I'm sure your question might be something that someone else was wondering about. And so it's important that I be very clear in terms of my presentation. So let's just talk about the first two of the two items. Electric vehicles. We want to GLREA, and we want to go through electrification. And what electrification means is not only do we want to generate electricity for air conditioning and other items in our homes, we also want to transition from gasoline cars to electric cars. Um, and so that's why President Biden had a tax credit for buying a used EV, as well as for a brand new electric vehicle. And those were supposed to continue to 2032. But now you have to acquire that car, whether used or new, by the end of this year. By actually wrong, September 30th. So you only have basically 2 months, 2.5 months to make your purchase in order to still be able to take advantage of those tax credits for used and electric and new electric vehicles. Same thing applies for 45W, a couple of points down for commercial electric vehicles. EV charging, there was a tax credit for that. 30C, that gives you a little bit more time. If you purchase it and you place it in service by June 30th, 2026, you can still get the tax credit for that, which is better. Um, and then, of course, we keep going down. 25C, energy efficiency home improvement. You know, it's one thing to get solar and geothermal, but if your house is leaking like a sieve because of poor insulation or whatever, then there's a strong argument to be made that you want to, tighten up your home, with the envelope in terms of preserving your heat in the winter and preserving your air conditioning in the summer. So that was the policy rationale behind 25C. But now you have to do all those improvements and put them all into action by December 31st, 2025. And here's the big one for GLREA for homeowners that want to purchase a solar energy system. You can see in the middle column that under the Biden law, you have up to 2034, the end of 2034, to place in service a solar energy system, and you'd get 30% off of the cost of the system by reducing the amount of federal income taxes you pay, a dollar for dollar until 30% of the actual cost. And it didn't matter what the cost of the system was, whether it was a small system or even a large system. As long as you complied with state law, that your system can only be 110% of what your historical usage of electricity was. But now you have to, and this is one of those weird definitions that we still don't know the full impact on. The law in the Trump bill, it says expenditures made by December 31st, 2025. But we don't actually know what expenditures made means. And one of the things that I hope people heard about is that the so-called Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives, they only agreed to vote for the bill if Trump was willing to issue an executive order trying to define some of the terms in the bill. And Trump agreed. So the Freedom Caucus therefore gave their votes to the version of the bill that came back from the Senate. The Senate bill is what actually became law. The initial bill was passed in the House, then it went to the Senate. The Senate made changes, sent it back to the House, and because they were under a July 4th timeline, the House ultimately agreed to all the changes in the Senate. So that was a tangent. I just want to make that clear. So the executive order that Trump issued is requiring the Internal Revenue Service and probably the Department of Treasury to define specifically what does it mean when it says expenditures made by December 31st. So we don't know whether that means the entire solar system has to be installed, whether it has to be placed in service, which would be the most extreme definition of what expenditures made, or does that simply mean that someone signs a contract to install solar by a solar installer, and the solar installer starts spending money to begin the installation of the solar system? So, for instance, when a solar installer installs a solar system, they have to buy the panels, they have to get the racking, they have to get an inverter, and then, of course, they have to get some wiring and all that. So when they start spending money, is that good enough to account for getting the 30% tax credit? If that's the definition that the Internal Revenue Service decides within the next 30 days or so, then that will be slightly better because then our solar installer friends could start the installation of solar on as many projects as people sign contracts to, and then they would be able to, abide by the letter of the law, even if the vast majority of the installation takes place in the early part of 2026. But we don't know what the definition of expenditures made is going to be. So we're going to have to wait. And my recollection of this executive order by Trump, which came out, I think, last week, that he is giving the IRS 45 days to make that determination of that definition, which is an extremely um, accelerated timeline for the IRS to make a kind of interpretation of statutory language, which is within a federal bill. Um, so you can continue down to a new energy efficiency home. You know, construction's has got to begin by 2020 by the end of 2027. So no, I'm reading the wrong thing. I apologize. The home's got to be acquired by June 30th, 2026. So that gives a little bit of time. But again, what does it mean by home acquired? Does that mean you build a home from scratch and you sign a contract? Or are you buying a home that already has energy efficiency measures made? And, so it's unclear what that means. So we continue down, and then we get into larger scale. Oh, Michael, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see you. Go ahead, Michael.
I have a notice from my tax accountant that says on that 25D residential clean energy
Yep.
that it has to be installed and producing electricity by December 31st.
Okay, well, that certainly is a possibility. I mean, that I think it's slightly premature, but your tax accountant is probably being conservative to to provide absolute guidance for their clients. And so I'm hoping that the definition will be slightly looser than that, but that very well may in fact be the case. So we'll just have to wait and see. But certainly, if a solar system is installed and placed in service, then that would absolutely guarantee they get the 30% tax credit. The only problem with that scenario, and anybody that's installed a solar system knows this, DTE and consumers, the utility that you are part of their territory, they have to come out and inspect it, and then they have to give the final approval to turn on the system. So if DT, so that, so you, we could definitely see a scenario where the system is completely installed by December 15th, and now it's time for DTE to come out and examine it and give the thumbs up and give the official, turning on the power thing. And if they drag their feet, which they've been known to do, frankly, then it may push it beyond December 31st before power starts to be generated. So that could also be a problematic situation. Jay, go ahead.
I kind of interpret expenditure meaning I have spent the money. Everything's been purchased, whether it's been installed or not, may happen in 2026, but that all expenditures have been made that are going to go into the tax form for that year. So I read it as the expenditure of money has been made, but the system is not necessarily installed yet.
Yeah, Jay, that's a very potential scenario. The only thing I would respond to that, and I'll use myself as an example. When I installed my solar system, my solar installer required a down payment, but they didn't require the total payment until the system was complete. So my initial down payment was, I don't know, a few $1,000. And then the rest of the cost of the system, I think my system cost me 17 altogether. And I think my final check, once it was done, was around 15,000. So I had the luxury of paying for my system over, probably a month and a half. So it made my cash flow a little easier. But if you have to pay, again, using my situation as an example, if I had to pay the full 17,000 up front, then that potentially could have put a crimp in my ability because of cash flow concerns. So that might be a problem for other people. And then, of course, we have this scenario where people borrow money, for instance, from, Michigan Saves. There are, in some cases, there are more people involved than just the solar owner or the solar purchaser. We have to make sure that the example I gave a minute ago, that DTE is on board with checking systems out as soon as they get the word. And then, of course, if someone needs to get a loan from Michigan Saves, they tend to make their decisions whether to grant a loan very quickly, but they're going to have to get the money out the door to the solar installer to be able to buy all the equipment, the full cost of the system, So there's some unknowns out there, and which is troubling, So, but both of Jay's points and Michael's points are very good points. So I appreciate those comments. So let's keep going down a little bit to 45E and 48E, because these are the large commercial utility scale wind and solar projects. And this is where the bill is very ideological, because as you can see already, they're totally targeting renewable energy and electric vehicles and energy efficiency. And that trend, it's not a trend, that continues with large scale wind and solar, because you can see right now for the PTC and the ITC tech neutral, it didn't matter what type of energy the system was going to be for. It could be any source, gas, wind, solar, nuclear. And if the construction began in 2025 to 2032 in the middle column, then you were able to get, the company that was building the system, the final end user, they would be able to get the tax credit. But now if you look at the far right column, Now there's a carve out for wind and solar that they must begin construction before July of 2026, just 1 year after enactment, in order to get the tax credit. And then you have to build the whole thing and place it in service within 4 years. Or the second clause, you place it in service by December 31st, 2027. So that is a specific targeted to try and derail wind and solar by this Trump bill, by the Republican bill. Now, if you go down, if John Sarver keeps scrolling down to the green section, you'll notice that the other technologies, hydro storage, and geothermal, and we support geothermal, they're not affected by this, So, and storage also applies to batteries, which is a good thing. So they get, the tax credit for those don't change at all. They stay the same as under the Biden bill. And the same thing with nuclear. That doesn't affect it either. So this is obviously a push this is a bill which is intended to de-emphasize wind and solar by attacking the economics of it, by making it more difficult for those types of large-scale development projects and using the vernacular of financing, to make those projects pencil out. Because what happens is a lot of developers, they don't necessarily have all the capital to build these large-scale systems. They go out and get investors, and they offer investors two aspects for them to invest in the system. One, they'll get a return on their investment by virtue of the fact that they'll get a bit of the profit. But also, in a lot of cases, they can take advantage of the tax credit in order to reduce their own federal tax liabilities. The developers will dangle that to, wealthy investors to encourage them to invest in these wind and solar projects. And now it will continue to apply to, nuclear and other things. So I'm glad that geothermal was spared, and I'm very glad that battery storage was spared. But in terms of wind and solar, it's a real damaging thing.
Can I ask a
So
question?
go ahead, Nikki.
On the storage, is that still just large construction, or is that also personal storage?
I think, I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Um,
I can't see the top of that section, so
Yeah,
I don't know if
let's go back up, John, if we could, back to I don't know if it says storage under, let me just look under residential, 1 second. Well, okay. I'm looking under, and the second article that I sent out this afternoon at 3:30 or so, I sent you a link to an article by Canary Media. And in that article, there is a chart similar to this, but it has some expanded words on it. And if you look under 25D, it says there that households that install clean energy, including solar, wind, geothermal, fuel cells, or batteries, this credit now only applies for purchases made by December 31st, 2025. So what I think, Nikki, what it means is that if a homeowner wanted to install a battery system with a solar system, they would have to do it all by the end of this year.
okay,
And
thank
it's
you.
large scale battery systems for utility scale stuff that would be spared under the large scale solar tax credits, so that's a problem, a serious problem. So I don't know if there's much more to say. I mean, I guess obviously, advanced manufacturing, if you go down to 45X, a big part of the Biden bill was to encourage companies to manufacture renewable energy parts, solar panels, racking, inverting, whatever. And so that looks as though that's been changed. So, you know, so you can just maybe not for batteries, and so um, well, I guess maybe it goes up to 2030, 100% credit. Maybe it goes up to 2030 at this point. Um, but previously, um, so you can see it for yourself. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on all this, but you can get the flavor of this bill. You could, let's just focus on carbon capture for a moment. Now that John's got it down there. One of the interesting things in the Michigan legislature is that, the clean energy standard, which takes effect by 2040, says that in Michigan, if a utility is able to build a new coal-powered power plant, and it can still be considered to be quote unquote clean energy, as long as I think it's 95% of the carbon is sequestered, captured and sequestered. So there's another bill which is in the legislature right now about setting up the parameters for carbon sequestration. So this federal bill um, might affect that, because if it says that that you have to begin construction, I guess that hasn't changed at all. The carbon capture under the Biden administration, construction begins December 31st, 2032. And I guess that hasn't changed at all. So, but the utilities are going to have to start moving quickly if they're going to be interested in doing that. So anyway, so I mean, I'm not an expert on all this. We're kind of learning about it together. So this gets you a flavor of what's happening. So I guess the bottom line is this, and let's go back to I don't know whether it was Michael or Nikki at this point, maybe Jay, but at this point, until we hear differently from the IRS, if anybody on this call is interested in getting a solar system, you need to move immediately to contact a solar installer and to begin the steps that need to be done in order to get your solar system installed by the end of this year. And then, of course, if we're lucky, we'll hear in a couple weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, that only if the expenditures occur or if they start, then you get a little bit more time. But again, to be conservative about this, people should start immediately to do this. So
I have something to add, John.
go ahead, Jay.
I was discussing this with John Sarver before the meeting started, but Marianne and we tend to have a rather complex tax filing, so she has always drugged me off to H&R Block. This year, it turned out to be a really, really good move. As most all of us know, we fill out the residential energy credit form, IRS 5695. And in that, we go and state what our total costs were for putting in solar. Well, this year I did a big upgrade, and it cost $12,500, a significant amount. And now, normally, the 30% of that gets paid off only as you have tax liability year after year after year. We were still rolling a piddly $340 over from the previous year. But anyway, one of the things that happened with H&R Block was, because we are both over the age of 65 and we are both fully retired, we were able to file Form 1040 SR. kind of like senior retired. But 1040 SR does things a wee bit different than the normal 1040 form. When you fill out your 5695 for your solar tax credit, normally it rolls over into a lower portion in the strain of fields that you fill out on the 1040. But in the 1040 SR, it ends up being rolled into line 20 on tax and credits. So it's basically you fill out 5695. You go to Schedule 3. It basically carries over through that. You carry it over to line 20 of your 1040 SR, and now your solar tax credit becomes some of the taxes you have paid for the year. And in the end, we ended up, instead of having to divvy out little tiny bits of this money we've earned through the 30%, instead of having to get that back over the course of many years, 1040 SR says, hey, you ain't going to live long enough. You're old and retired. We should just give it to you now. And indeed, we ended up getting it given to us directly as a refund check instead of having to wait for it. So, folks, take a look at 1040 SR when you do your taxes, and see if you qualify and if that will roll over for you. Ultimately, in the end, we ended up with over $9,600 coming back to us as a refund check this year. And if the 30% little account that normally rolls over year to year disappears, we don't have to worry about it. We're fully paid out in one fell swoop. So take a look at 1040 SR, see if it applies to you, and try to get all your money right away before anybody else messes with the tax system. Back to you, John.
Well, thanks, Jay. I appreciate that comment. The only thing I just want to add is that, again, I haven't seen any bulletins by the Internal Revenue Service. What happens with the Internal Revenue Service is that when they have a situation like this, where there's a new law that's on the books and it requires some interpretation, they will make their decision and then they will issue a bulletin that anybody can access. And if you're on the IRS like listserv, you'll get an email with an indication that they made a decision regarding this tax credit or that tax credit. So and all the accountants are signed up, so they get these bulletins automatically. But my only point in all this is that I've heard nothing about if, in fact, you still get your system in place, so you're eligible for the 30%. I have heard nothing that indicates that if you don't use up that 30% the first year, you can still apply it for next year's taxes until you use up the total amount of money that 30% represents. So your point's well taken, Jay. But if you're not over 65 and you're below 65 and you can't get access to that specific uh, section that you articulated, I don't, at this point, I don't think people have to worry about whether you won't be able to roll the tax credit forward if you don't fully use it up. But that's another unknown. And hopefully the IRS will make it real clear about what will happen. I saw in the chat um, that Karina Service had a couple of comments. And I just want to, I don't know if she wants to come off mute and make her comments. I mean, I could make them for her if she liked, but um, I think she made some interesting comments that number one, if she didn't have the tax credit for buying an electric car, she would still buy an electric car because of presumably the value to her of owning an electric car and the savings, the inherent savings you get from having an electric car where you don't have to buy gas, electricity is cheaper, there are less parts in a car, so there's less maintenance involved. So ultimately, you save money by having an electric car. But then she says that if she had to buy a solar system right now, it's unclear whether not having the 30% could have impacted her financial decision. Um, and then she says for air source heat pump, um, you know, it sounds like she wouldn't have done that either. And then, of course, her final comment, which I thought was interesting, was that by the time Consumers Energy was contacted regarding Karina's solar system was ready to be turned on, it took consumers 2 weeks to get out there. So that goes back to my earlier point that the December 31st date, if it's interpreted to mean that you have to have the system in place and operating, generating power, then the December 31st isn't real. It's probably more like December 1st in order to contact DTE or consumers in order for them to get out there to make the inspection and then for them to, flip the switch to turn it on. Now, one thing that GLREA can do, along with the Michigan Public Service Commission, is that once these interpretation of these rules become clearer, we can put pressure on on the Public Service Commission and DTE, in this case, directly to make them be responsive to the pending impact of people installing solar and having it be turned on before the 31st in order to get the 30%. So, um, okay. Other comments, Michael, go ahead. Michael Hagan, you're on mute. Go ahead.
Hear me now?
I can hear you, but we can't see you. There you
Okay.
go.
When I got my system, it was all set and the installer said that it's working, but I'm under DTE. It took DTE 2 months to come and approve it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's unacceptable. I mean, the only good thing that's going on with DTE right now is that they're under a lot of pressure. They're getting a lot more political heat because of their rate increase they filed. Like I said earlier, 11.1% increase in residential rates. And plus, there's a ballot initiative right now where people are collecting signatures to stop DTE from being able to give political contributions. So they might be feeling pressure to try and do a little public relations where they respond a heck of a lot quicker than 2 months. But if that's the case, yeah, people could be really damaged by this. Nikki, go ahead.
Yeah, when I'm consumers and when I have a duplex and they messed up giving the approval, they only gave the approval for one side and we had to go back and argue with them that there's two sides. And it took an additional 3 weeks to get the second side approved. So there's that. But also your question about if you don't get tax credits, would people do things? And I'm basically just living off retirement, and so I don't qualify for tax credits when it comes to the solar stuff. And I put on solar panels. I got the EV car. I'm looking to get now battery storage backup. So yes, I think if people really are into wanting to get electrified, they will do it even if they don't get the tax credits. My biggest problem right now is finding somebody who's free to do the work, because
Right.
everybody's, they want it all by, September. So I just simply said, I can wait. I don't qualify for credits. I can wait. And so I finally got somebody interested.
Nikki,
But
tell me again, how long was you,
well, from the time they approved the first installation to approving the second installation was about 3 weeks.
okay.
Yeah, and it was just paperwork. They got themselves confused that there were two installations on because it looks like one roof.
I'm taking some notes right now, and this is going to be, I'm going to make this a topic in the weekly update newsletter that I send out every week. And then we're going to put an article in the Great Lakes Renewable Energy News, our monthly newsletter as well. to talk about what people should do in terms of in response to this tax credit. And one things I'm going to highlight is the fact that DTE and consumers, we should treat them that we need to be careful with them to make sure that they respond quicker. And I, in fact, we may want to send DTE and consumers letters directly from our association asking them that they've got a lousy track record in terms of being responsive to okaying new solar systems.
Well, I don't know what they're like now. I got mine back in 2019.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I think there's no harm in sending them letters and asking them to formally respond to us that they're committed to responding within days of someone installing a solar system. Because
Well,
we need to,
Sorry.
no, go ahead,
Agree with
Marcia.
that.
Yeah, it seems to me that the Public Service Commission should make a really big pitch to both of those major utilities that they have to. And I think it should go out also, even though they don't regulate the co-ops. I mean, it should go out to everyone who manages the electric grid in this state. All
No, I
those.
think it's a good point. That's a great point, Marcia. And we have a wonderful intern. I think she's on tonight, Icky Koch, who has put together this amazing spreadsheet of all the utilities in Michigan and what their policies are regarding, distributive energy, solar, net metering. And so we now have a great list. So I think you're right, Marcia. We should send letters to all the utilities, all the munis, all the co-ops about because it doesn't matter where you're located in Michigan. You can get the 30% if you live in Michigan. But again, if the utility up north is very slow in getting out and okaying the system, then that's a problem.
Yeah, and I think the biggies really ought to have, several people assigned to do that as soon as they're called. I mean, the next day they go out and do it, whatever.
I agree. Okay, Clyde Taylor, go ahead.
On that bill, is there anything regarding the REAP grants?
No, yes and no. There's nothing about the REAP grants in this bill, but there was an announcement yesterday, Clyde, it's going to be in the monthly newsletter. I've already put it in the August newsletter folder that the Department of Agriculture just summarily stopped processing any more REAP grants as of, I think, literally today. They made the announcement yesterday, and it came across my desk in like an article or some newsletter or something. So I think that REAP grant is gone. It didn't say it's going to be gone necessarily permanently, but they have stopped processing new grants right now. And Clyde, I will try and track down that article where I saw this and send it to you. Okay? Does that sound good?
Yeah, I sure appreciate it. I've been too busy making hay to follow the news.
Well, that sounds good, Clyde. And by the way, I'm gonna give a plug for Clyde. He's gonna do a solar story down the road. It's gonna be a new format where John Sarver is gonna be interviewing Clyde to talk about how Clyde, what the process was for Clyde to put a solar system on his farm up near slightly east of Mount Pleasant. So that's going to be a really interesting solar story. And I'm not sure what the date is, sometime in August or September or something. So it's 10 to 8. So we have about 12 minutes left. Do we have any final questions regarding this topic of federal policy? Because I do want to bring up one other topic and I need your input on before we call it an evening. So are there any final questions? Janice Means has got a plug in a book in the chat about a new book coming out by Bill McKibben, Here Come the Sun, Last Chance. I think Bill probably should do a quick update of his book to talk about the impact of losing these tax credits, because that might be damaging for some of his predictions. But still, McGibbon is a great author and a great person, a great scientist. So if so people are interested in reading, you should check it out. Okay,
John, I would like to make one comment.
go ahead.
I really think that a lot of people simply don't understand the economic value, and I'm not even talking about the environmental value of having solar produce their electricity. I mean, I just think people don't understand it. And I don't know how you get beyond that somehow. I know having these small meetings and talking about it, those people are already sort of interested, but there are a lot of other people out there. It's sort of like EVs. They've always had a gasoline car, and they really, it's like another world. It's like something alien to them. And I don't know how you get beyond that. I mean, it's really a good economic move to get solar panels to produce your electricity.
Marcia, I couldn't agree with you more. And we had an education committee, I think it was last week, and we talked about it also since then, about putting together a document or two that talks about the economic value of getting solar as a result of losing the 30%. And the two things that we want to emphasize in this document is, one, that solar energy is a lot cheaper than getting electricity from DTE and consumers. And that savings is only going to increase as the utilities keep increasing the rates year after year after year. And then the other economic aspect we want to emphasize is the fact that the Department of Energy has done a couple of studies over the years talking about the increase in property value if someone installs a solar system to their home. So when they end up selling their house and they put it on the market, a house of the same size as their neighbor's house, but if your house has solar and your neighbor doesn't, the studies indicate that you will be able to sell your house for a greater amount than what your neighbor can get. So in other words, the money you put into solar, you're going to get back when you sell your house. And we've always talked about that, but we've always kind of led with the 30% to make it more of an economic bargain or an economic pitch. But I think we need to give some time and attention to exactly what you're suggesting, Marcia, to lay out a memo about how often do the rates go up by DTE and consumers. And one thing we're going to do, we're going to contact the Public Service Commission and get charts on how the rates have gone up for the last several years and what the projection is for the rates going up in the future. And then that will become part of the chart. Go ahead, Janice.
Okay, regarding the article and book that I just put in the chat, it's right on, it's very up to date. He was pointing out in the article that 96% of the global demand for new electricity was met by renewables. And in the United States, it was 93% of the new generating capacity came from solar, wind, and ever-increasing varieties of batteries to store that power. He also mentioned Texas. Now, Texas is a red state, right? It's now installing more renewable energy and batteries faster than California. And in a single week in March, it set records for solar and wind production, as well as for battery discharge. And there's just a lot of really good information on this. It's right up to date, and you may get some ideas. I know it's not per se for Michigan, but it really is very hopeful to hear other states, what they're doing and what they're doing around the world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And by the way, everybody, you all know that Janice was a former board member of GLREA. So we just want to thank her once again for her service. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you.
Well, just so that you know, my DTE energy bill last month, it doubled. it went from 4 cents to 8 cents.
That's perfect. Thank you, Michael. You can only factor in what 11.1% increase would be, so. Okay, Philip, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I just want to say this tax bill is by creating incentives not to proceed with solar and renewable energy. They're going to cause an energy um, bottleneck or some sort. I don't know, I'm trying to find the right word, crisis or something, where energy rates, on top of all these annual rates that consumers and DTE are always pursuing, they're going to force additional changes just due to, I think, potential scarcity. I think, but with all these uh, additional demands for the electrical grid and for electrical capacity, it's like leaning into a punch. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is the argument for people, even if you don't have a tax credit, is the fact that electricity is going to be going up, the cost of it at a much faster rate as a result of this bill. So the longer you delay getting renewable energy is just the more you're going to have to pay in monthly electrical bills. So,
No, I think that's right, Phil. And just to pick up on Phil's point slightly more, that clearly Trump is trying to promote nuclear power, coal power, natural gas power. But what's fascinating is that there is a shortage of turbines for coal and natural gas. And so, even if you want to build a new gas plant, you may not be able to do it for several years. And the quickest way to build more capacity for instance, these data centers is wind and solar, because particularly solar, because it's very quick to install a large scale solar system. It doesn't involve a whole lot. I mean, obviously there's some major steps involved, but it's a much quicker process, which is one of the advantages. Okay, I want to flip the switch to another topic. We had a board meeting last night where we have always held our annual year-end-year begin meeting on the first Saturday of December. We've done that for as long as I've been associated with GLREA, which is now almost 10 years at this point. And it's worked out pretty well. But there has been some concern that by having the year-end-year begin meeting in December, we bump up against the holidays, we bump up against lousy weather, and sometimes it's difficult to find a venue for holding the meeting because there's a lot of competition for holiday events and whatnot. So there was an argument made to the board that we should move the meeting to November. And the board agreed, almost as an experiment, that we should for sure move the year-end-year begin meeting to November before Thanksgiving, probably around November 14th. But then there was a second proposal made that whether we should hold the year-end-year begin meeting on a Friday instead of a Saturday. And the argument that was made to support this move was that a lot of people would prefer to spend their weekends with their family because they only have a weekend for downtime from work. And that if this is about renewable energy, that people within the renewable energy sphere would come to the meeting on Friday because it's a work related debate or discussion or participation. But the counter argument to that is that if someone who works at a non-renewable energy job Monday through Friday, if the year-end-year begin meeting is on Friday and the person can't take the day off to come, then maybe they wouldn't be able to come. But if it's held on a Saturday, then of course they could come because it doesn't conflict with their own job. So we didn't make a decision last night about whether we should move it from Friday or from Saturday to a Friday. But one board member suggested I bring it up tonight to get some input from people of whether you think we should move it from a Saturday to a Friday. And so I just want to quickly have people tell me what you think. Does anybody have any strong opinions about this?
I'm retired. I can do either day. They all blend together. They all look alike.
That it's the same for me because I'm retired. However, I'm thinking of the people that work, and I think it's going to be very difficult, especially depending on what distance they have to travel. That Saturday would be better.
Okay.
Maybe you could plan some sort of family event following it. Maybe that would work out if the concern is that members want to spend time with their family. If they could come to the meeting and then have some sort of family get together also there, something that would be fun with kids and adults too, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. I see in the chat that Bill Stow says we'll get more attendees if we move it to Friday than interfering with family time on Saturday. Um, any other opinions or thoughts? Anybody want to share? I'm going to call upon some people then. I'm going to play teacher. John Gurley, what do you think?
Personally, I'm retired, and so it doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
If you, it depends on who you want to attract to these meetings. If you want to attract people who want to educate themselves but are not really in the solar business or aren't really invested in the issues, I think Saturday would be better. Just because they'll be working at some other kind of job and they won't be able to take the day off likely.
Okay. Mike Booza, are you there? Can you tell me your opinion?
Yeah, I'm here. Actually, it seems like I'm getting more and more uh uh events happening on Saturday, and I think it actually, even though I'm retired, it kind of interferes with some of my family time and things that I want to do on the weekend. So it does make a difference to me because I have family that is working that I want to spend time with.
Okay, so you'd vote for Friday then.
Yeah.
Tom Borton, what do you think? Tom, are you there? How about Dave Curtis?
Yes, sir. I am also retired. I would vote for Friday
Okay.
just
Thank-
because of all of the uh, issues that John Gorley mentioned.
Okay, sounds great. Charles Morris, what do you think? Reverend, I
I'm
mean,
thinking-
Pastor.
I think past of Michigan Interfaith Parlay, we always had our conferences on Fridays, and I think if you have enough folk, enough lead time for people that are interested, they can bake that in on a Friday. I mean, that's normally a conflict with workday, but if it's several months out, I think people want to be there, they'll be there.
What do you think, Phil? Phil Reed, what do you think? I don't recall you sharing us your opinion last night.
Well, being retired, I can go either way. I think I just want to mention that one of the arguments for going Friday is was the belief that it might get more professional people involved because they have an excuse to take the day off.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Joe, go ahead, Janice. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest that perhaps should survey the membership.
Right.
And
Yeah.
state some of the advantages and disadvantages both ways and ask them what they think.
Okay.
I
Sounds
think
good.
that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I
Okay.
agree, because that's making a decision based on data.
Exactly.
Of
Don't
course.
be like the current administration, which is trying to erase climate change by not recording any data.
Yeah, right.
Good point.
Seriously.
Okay, well, this has been very helpful. I think I will do the survey and we'll get that up and running soon. But I appreciate everyone's time tonight. And
Where is the meeting?
it's going to be in the Ann Arbor area this year.
Great.
We don't know yet, but that's part of the reason why we're having this discussion in the middle of July, because we're definitely going to move it to November. And Lexi Crilly, our new staff person, she is currently doing research for places in Ann Arbor. And for Michael Gorley Michael Hagan and John Gorley's of the world, and other people who live in the Ann Arbor area, if you know of a good location that has good parking, free parking, and it's right next door to the facility, and they have excellent Wi-Fi, let us know. I'm thinking actually of a new place. I hope Lexi is listening. Concordia College on Gettings Road, because usually community colleges, like Lansing Community College, rents out their place, and that's where the Geothermal Association has their meeting, and they have excellent parking and excellent Wi-Fi. We tried to get them last year, but we ran into a conflict that they were all booked up in December, which speaks to the rationale of us moving ours to November. The Geothermal Association, they had their big event, I think it was in June this year. Anyway, enough of that. So I'll do a survey. Look for it in your mailbox. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. It's been
John, one last thing. If
Go
you come
ahead.
to Ann Arbor, you have to be aware of the football schedule.
Right. That was an argument made to move it to Friday. I agree. Because
Even if it's a Friday of a football weekend, you won't find any rooms available.
yeah, but it's going to be easier. I mean, than having it on Saturday. Like we
Yeah,
had,
but do it on a non-football weekend.
I know, but that's challenging sometimes, because, but you're right, Michael, that was brought up. So it doesn't
Okay.
matter whether it's in Lansing or Ann Arbor, you got U of M and MSU, and there are a lot of people that want to do both. And so we got to accommodate everybody, blue and green. But I tell you one thing, we're not going to hold our meeting in Columbus, Ohio. That's a guarantee. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. We
Bye.
appreciate it. Bye-bye now.
Right.